And we will welcome everybody back to the Car Guy and Six Fan Show. This is our season 8, and we're giving you guys some time to watch some commercials or some ads. So be it if you're not subscribed to a premium service. That way we can start the show a little bit kind of
and pay our
behind.
bills.
Yeah, we can pay our
High,
bills too, right? So if you
high
guys are
dollar
watching,
production here.
exactly. So welcome to the Car Guy and Six Fan Show. My name is Jason. I am the car guy of the Car Guy and Six Fan Show. My partner in crime.
I'm Grant Tommy. I'm straight Six Fan on YouTube. That makes me Six Fan of this operation. And welcome in, everybody. We are powered by the Get Out and Drive podcast. It's a great partnership. And I'm excited about tonight because, while yes, season 8 we've billed as the greatest hits season, it's also, we're trying to capture everything we've done to date. And so we're kind of going back to our roots today, and excited to have our guest who is below us, and we'll let him do the introduction of himself. So Jeremy, I'll hand it on down to you.
Hi, I guess I'm the B-side then for the greatest hits album, but my name's Build Something is my YouTube channel. My name's Jeremy, and yeah, I saw these guys' podcast. They're interviewing DeBoss Garage, and I thought they had a really good show and offered to come on, and they let me come on, so thank you guys for having me. Glad to be here.
And I hope you guys aren't terribly disappointed in our guest this evening. We're not trying to make any light of the situation, but we did have Junkyard Diggs lined up for tonight. Unfortunately, he was unable to commit, but we did rebook him for the end of the season. He'll be our season finale episode as long as everything comes together. So we're hoping for that. We've had him on the show before. He was a great guest, and him and Mook. So hopefully we can kind of keep that lined up for our season finale. Grant, before we kind of dive right in to the Car Guy and Six Fan Show tonight with our guest Build Something, we want to touch on a few housekeeping things. National Get Out and Drive Day is coming up this Sunday, folks. If you're not set up or registered for National Get Out and Drive Day 2022, please head on over to Get Out and Drive website. At www.getoutndrive.com. Register yourself, and we'll send you a sticker, and make sure that when you're out driving on National Get Out Drive Day, which is Sunday, you take some pictures, you take some video, and you tag us in that video as National Get Out and Drive Day, as well as hashtag Get Out and Drive. Grant, we've also got lots of people in the chat already. We're showing 20 people in the chat. Why don't you go through and give a little bit of a roll call, see who's there joining us tonight?
Absolutely. So Melissa Nunez is doing the moderator action tonight. So we're always appreciative of her and the work she does, keeping links in the chat. Jason Rock, Everything's Broken Garage. Big Al, Alan, I believe it's Bolu. I don't know. Bolio. Okay, there we go. Paul Meyer, Will's Wheels. Joanne Meyer, The Bandit. We also have King Eric the Greatest of All, Dudes with Wrenches, Uncle Squirrel. The names keep piling in. Dan with Greasy Boy Customs, repping his swag tonight. And I think I missed one. Of course, the Get Out and Drive podcast. Shoot, my scroll bar jumped on me, so I feel like I'm missing one in there. But anyway, welcome everybody. It should be a good show. I did want to say it's going to be National Get Out and Flog Your Rental Car Day for me. On Sunday, because I will be traveling to Jason's neck of the woods. So we'll follow back up on that and remind everybody of a brief scheduling change next week. And then the last house cleaning item. Sorry, Jeremy, you're probably bored listening to this ramble on and on about all these things, but every dollar spent in the super chat does get you acknowledged and, how should we say, monitored for the end of the year, and there are prizes given out. So with that, Jason, why don't you kick us off with tonight's first question?
Absolutely. It's always good to find new channels, and Grant is the one who brought your channel name to me. So I kind of went over there, and I'm looking and seeing what you have to offer. And of course, the first thing that kind of reaches out and slaps me in the face like Chuck Norris is this big Cummins swap that you're doing over on your channel. Tell the folks who are watching a little bit about what you're swapping and how the whole idea came about to do what you're doing.
Well, like many other car guys, I think I just have a little bit insane because it's a pretty stupid swap. But so, like you said, I'm doing a Cummins swap, but it's a little bit of a weird one. I have I know certain channels on YouTube will recommend that you probably don't come and swap like a half-ton truck, like an F-150 or something. I did a step up from that. I'm coming swapping a Ford Explorer, so it's a very small little car. They didn't even put V8s in these cars, so took out the 400-pound V6 and decided for some reason that it needed a 1,200-pound turbo diesel with 5.9 liters and like 14-to-1 compression, or whatever crazy thing it is. So yeah, I thought it'd be a fun swap. It was originally my high school 4x4. When I was in high school, I decided I needed to start getting into some 4x4s, and I decided I need a little more power. And I was thinking, well, what can I do? And of course, I looked at different V8 swaps, LS swaps, stuff like that, modular Fords, and I kind of decided that it's a little boring, like everyone does an LS swap.
I'm
And
not gonna lie.
if I really wanted a V8 Explorer, I'm pretty sure they sell those if I just want to get one that's a little newer. So I decided maybe I'd try out the diesel world. So decided on a 12 valve Cummins. Figured if I was going to do a diesel swap, I might as well do the one everybody likes.
Yeah, so as the resident Ford guy and being a previous Ranger owner myself and a fan of the twin I-beam, or in your case the twin traction beam, I know all the ins and outs of the anatomy of these vehicles. But what I'm most curious about, you talked about going from 700 pounds to 1,200 pounds.
400
I'm
pounds,
curious,
but yes.
400, 1,200. Yes, we're tripling the nose weight there. What I guess I'm curious, what about your build? How did you reimagine the front suspension to be able to support and not just nosedive the old Ford Explorer?
Well, I'm glad you're on my team because I also like the twin traction beam. So I think that what I did was kind of in the spirit of some offbeat hot rodding, like you said. I think the old school way is to just get junkyard parts from big trucks that are way too big for the crap you're putting it in and throw it in there. So what I did is I actually went to a U-Pull and grabbed the twin traction beam out of an F-250 Ford pickup. So it's the Dana 50 twin traction beam, which is like a 9-inch ring gear with a high pinion. So it's a really tough front end, and everybody's going to be roasting me for the camber in that shot right there. I already know, but so I decided I didn't want to go with a solid axle swap because I actually am a fan of the twin traction beam, and that's what I went with in the front. The rear's a Dana 70 that was out of the Ram 2500 parts truck, so 3/4 ton axles front and back.
And I guess when it comes to doing something like this, it takes a little bit of a background to be able to fabricate, plan the design out. You said before, nobody's taking these big heavy engines and putting them in small, half-ton or quarter-ton, whatever type vehicles. You have to have a little bit of fabrication background or something that kind of focuses on what is it going to take for me to shoehorn this into that. What is your background? What allows you to have A, the knowledge, but B, the confidence to do what you've done with this Ford Explorer?
I like to call it brute force and ignorance. I just stubbornly want to make it work. So I do have a bit of a background, but I wouldn't say that you have to have a background to make any of this work. That's one of the things I like to try and show on my channel, is that when I was younger, it was car blogs on the internet was the big thing. I wasn't really watching YouTube. I was always looking at these builds online where people were doing all this crazy stuff. And there was always stuff that I didn't know how to do that kind of got in the way. I was thinking like, I don't know how to, maybe I've rebuilt a transmission, but I've never dealt with like a hydraulic clutch pedal or some random thing that I'm just like, I've never done that. And I don't want those to be barriers to people. So I like trying to show like, this is how you learn how to do this stuff. So that being said, I did start as a technician. In high school, I did a whole bunch of automotive classes and decided that I was already halfway through an associate's in automotive technology. I might as well finish it up. So I went to college and got a degree to be a mechanic. But what I ended up doing was working as a technician and put myself through school to be an engineer. So I ended up doing both of those things, which is a weird path, but all the technicians that I went to school with were always telling me, when you're an engineer, you got to fix all this stupid crap all these engineers do. So I'm pretty used to that.
Well, something you said right there, it reminded me of one of my old taglines, and I apologize to the viewers for the distracting fly that seems to be hanging around my microphone here. But one of my old taglines was helping you build your hot rod and your confidence. So, like you said, you wanted to kind of do the same. You wanted to be an inspiration. When you didn't know how to do something, I'll figure it out. I'll put it on camera. So let's take you back to the very beginning of your YouTube roots. What is it that made you make that jump from car blog to the YouTube world? Like what was that motivational factor, and what was it that got you started doing the YouTube gig?
Yeah. Well, I just have to mention, because someone said in the chat, King Eric, yeah, someone did put a 12 valve in a Mustang. That was Weston Champlin, and that was a pretty cool build. I will point out, though, they did put V8s in those stocks, so mine's had a little bit more work to make it work. So your question was, sorry, what did I do to, could you just repeat the last part?
Basically the like the origin story of uploading your first YouTube video is
Yeah, okay. So the history of the channel was, I felt like when I had been watching all those blogs, reading all those blogs on the internet, I was really grateful that they were there, because it's kind of what introduced me to doing that. So when people do all that cool stuff, I think it's nice of them to put it out there. So I figured I'm going to be building this thing anyways. I didn't build this for YouTube. I built it because I wanted to build it. And if I'm going to be putting all this work in and doing something this stupid, I figure I might as well film it and make it available for people. And if people like it, that's great. And hopefully it's helpful. So that's really where it came from.
And when did you upload your first YouTube video? I was just kind of checking back on your channel, and you can probably tell me a lot quicker than me looking it up. But like, how long ago was it that you put your first video up?
I think it was about 2 years ago when I put the first one up. So I think I have about 50 videos total. I'm not the quickest uploader, because as you can imagine, a full-time job and trying to do all this fabrication work takes a lot of time. But yeah.
And so you upload your video to kind of record what it is you're doing, and you know, a lot of people say, well, you know, it's a passion to be able to do this, it's a passion to be able to do that, and some of us, myself included, might take that passion a little bit further and call it a sickness, to say, you know, I go and I buy this car and I buy that car, and depending on the cars that you buy, it is a little sickening. I mean, I own a Yugo. So the idea is that as you move forward and you decide what it is that you want to do, you feel, you know, if I'm going to be doing this, I do it anyway. And this is the reaction that we get from a lot of our YouTube interviews is, I was always doing it. Why not pick up the camera, pick up the phone, and start recording it and showing everybody what I'm doing? Because I'm there. I'm doing it anyways. Might as well put it out there. One of the key things that you've got going for you is 12 valve Cummins or 24 valve Cummins or whatever it is. Cummins is in the name. And if you're advertising Cummins on YouTube, it seems to be a big hit. So I think if you're tagging it properly, you're titling it properly, and you're getting the thumbnails out there, I think you're going to gain a lot of traction simply off of the Cummins name. What other ideas do you have rolling around your head that say, you know, I want to put something in something that doesn't belong?
So I think I have enough projects to last me a lifetime, which is part of the problem. But there's a few things. So my first ever project, what I would call it, is, I know that you'll identify with this one, Jason, but it was a 97 was my first one. Well, 96 was the first one. Ford Mustang with a 4.6 liter 2-valve engine. I've heard you might be working on one of those. And so that was really my first car that I bought myself, and that was my first project car. And I'm sure that's going to make another appearance on the channel. It's been getting pretty sad sitting there in my driveway for too long, and somebody stole some parts off and everything, so that needs a little bit of a revival. But that car I autocrossed a lot in high school, and I think one of the things I'd like to do, and this is a more traditional build, I guess, is just build that to be a little bit more of an autocross car. I have some other stuff I'm wanting to do. I have a few videos on some motorcycles and things. I think it'd be a lot of fun to do some things I don't see a lot, which is, I have this one motorcycle, and I'll just spoil it for everybody on here. If anybody's from my channel, then you'll know where it's coming up. But I had this one motorcycle that is a 82 Honda CB650, and these were 4-cylinder motorcycles, which is kind of odd, but they also had 4 carburetors. And oh, there's the look on your face. So I already am not that familiar with carburetors in the first place, but those 4 carburetors have driven me up the wall. I work on that thing way more than I drive it. So one of my next ideas is I want to see how difficult it might be to fuel injection swap that. And a few other things like that coming up. But
It definitely sounds like a challenge, because there's some people on our panel here that have a problem with just one carburetor. So 4 of them. I mean, Grant, what do you think? You should put 4 carburetors on the old Le Mans, or what?
Well, no, I'd just probably EV swap that motorcycle at that point, Jason. I think that's the trick. No, but
I wasn't going to say a EV swap. I thought that might be controversial if I brought that up here again.
Yes. I'm done talking about that for the season, for sure. But yeah, so Jeremy, you mentioned the idea of there's fabrication involved there. You got an associate's degree in mechanics, then you kind of shaded towards the engineering side. As an architect myself, I love the ability to, like, there's the idea stuck in my head, put it down on paper, and then go build it. And so I'm guessing you can relate a lot to that same amount. But going back to your front suspension on the Explorer, and I'm sure you had to figure out a heavier spring rate to support the 1,200 pounds, but also I noticed your radius arms are definitely long travel radius arms, or extended length radius arms. So take us through, like, your, maybe not necessarily even design process, but how you think through things and how you determine where you're going to go with your fabrication process, and how the engineering side comes into that part of it.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing about Dana 50 TTB is that the heavy duty Dana 50, it only came with leaf springs. So I had to swap it over to coils, and basically what drove the whole process was what's broken and what needs fixed. And the Dana 50 on leaf springs is a horrible suspension setup. TTB should never be on leaf springs. It doesn't let it articulate like it should. So I definitely wasn't going to keep that, and there would be more work than it's worth anyways. So first thing I had to fix was that. So I had to put coils on it. The next thing is, like you mentioned, the long travel. It's a 4x4, and if it doesn't have any travel in the front, then I'm definitely not going to convince anybody that TTB is any good. So I need to make sure I actually do something about that, and that's what the radius arms were about. The thing with the radius arms, though, and something I try and do a lot on my channel, is that was actually the cheapest solution anyways, because in order to get it in the car, I was going to have to modify the radius arms anyways. And if I'm modifying them, it was way cheaper to just build some tube structure, like build them out of tube, rather than trying to recreate the factory radius arms, which are built out of C channel, essentially is what it is, but it's just plate. So that's what really drove that, is I just find the things I don't like about it and try and fix them. If you watch my video on it, that's one of the videos where I do have a little bit more engineering involved. I do have some CAD in there, some, not cardboard, actual computer aided design. And just to reiterate, I don't think anybody actually needs to know how to do CAD or anything to do anything like this. I mostly do it just so people can picture what's going on. But those radius arms, I try to explain it in a way that if you know your high school geometry, you can figure out how to do it. You don't need an engineering degree in order to figure it out. And that's the other thing that drives it, is to keep it simple, stupid, and do something that I can actually explain and make it simple.
So those of you who are on right now watching and you don't know who Paul Meyer is, Paul is our kind of editor, production guy over at the Get Out and Drive podcast. He's in here every week, and he's chatting usually with the guys in the chat. But tonight, Jeremy, he's got a question for you, asking you if you build your parts from a 3D printer before final fabrication. And I see that in the background there. So obviously,
he's got a good eye there, Paul. May or may not be a stage prop. No, not really. That's just the only place I had to put it. So I hung a bunch of stuff on it to make it look intentional. So I think that's a really good idea, Paul. So when I was in high school, or sorry, when I was in college, we actually had some projects where we needed to design. So the course is called kinematics, which all you need to know is that it's designing linkages and things like that. And that's one of the things we did is you can do all the math and you can do all the stuff you need an engineering degree for, or you can take and 3D print it and test the linkage and see how it moves. And there's even ways to do it with cardboard and with paper where you can just take a few thumbtacks and some paper and put a linkage together, and you can design a linkage like that with only knowing high school geometry. So I didn't do that on my build, but it's a really good idea. And if I have another opportunity to design a linkage, I'd really like to incorporate that because I think it could be a really valuable skill. And designing linkages is a lost art too. Like when you look at older cars, they're everywhere. Every single mechanical lever has a 4-bar linkage or something that's holding it together. And even in engineering, people don't really know how to do that anymore. So I think it'd be really cool to show the geometry of it and how you can do it simply.
So as it comes to the twin traction beam and the articulation and all the things he spoke of, I'll be honest, I haven't checked in on the latest status of the exploder, as we used to call it back in the day with the Firestone issue. But how well does it? Have you RTI? Have you done an RTI ramp? What is the? Have you taken it on a trail? Are you happy with the obviously a little wider track with the TTB 50s as opposed to the what are they Dana 35s on the Rangers and Explorers? But how happy are you with the articulation?
So I have driven it a few times, like you showed in your video. I haven't gotten it on a trail yet. I know a lot of people on my channel are itching for me to actually put it on dirt, but one thing that's holding me back is I know everybody complains about parts, and that's why they're not putting videos out, but I've been waiting on a rear end for it forever and everything. But so I did test the suspension in the garage, and I can't remember the exact number. It's in one of my videos, but it's something like 15 inches of travel on the front, which it's not a huge number, but it is. I mean, that's not bad. It's not a pre-runner or a desert racer, but even a solid axle, you'd probably be happy with that for most things.
15 inches of travel is really nothing to sneeze at.
Yeah.
It's not, you get a lot of people who spend a lot of money on their Jeeps and this and that to try and get that 15 inches of travel. And, here you are doing it kind of almost by happenstance by putting, those beams and that big axle and the wide track. I mean, I think once it gets down to a certain point, you're certainly going to be able to take that thing on any trail that you want to, and really not have to worry about articulation. I want to go back just for a second and talk a little bit about something that Grant had mentioned about the Ford Exploder with the Firestone issue.
It wasn't Ford's fault.
It wasn't Ford's fault, but the reason why Ford gained the name Exploder, my dad's a transmission mechanic for like 35 years, so I know why they're called Exploders. It's not because of the tires, it's because of the transmissions.
Mine was a manual, that's fine.
Yeah, so you're fine. See, I mean, it wasn't an Exploder after all. And
I would fight that one because I went through a lot of M5 ODs and the old straight 6 F-150.
It's not a strong transmission.
It's not at all. I can remember back when because I was just a kid when my dad had the transmission shop, but I can remember him coming up, and he would be out. Every time I go down to his shop, there was always an Explorer in that shop, and he was, cursing them.
Well, maybe this is the time to ask him. Well, what transmission's behind the 12 valve then, Jeremy?
Somebody's going to be happy that I'm going to say it's from a Chevy, but it's a NV 4500. So it's again just grabbing 3/4 ton truck parts and throwing them in.
So so we've talked about the 12 valve Explorer. We want to step away from that a little bit. And let's kind of steer the conversation a little bit into the YouTube side of things. And I want to just find out a little bit about your YouTube history. Have you found certain things within YouTube that have worked for you versus things that haven't? Are you just kind of putting them out there and hoping for the best, or are you learning as you go?
Yeah. Well, it's funny that you guys keyed in immediately to the TTB because that was a big surprise to me, as that's one of the things that has done really well. I think that TTB video has like 30,000 views on it right now or something, which is a lot for me. A lot of the other videos that
That's a
are
lot for
more
me.
yeah, and a lot of the videos that are more Cummins focused and stuff, I mean, most of those are still under 1,000 views. So I was actually very surprised by that. And I think part of it is probably that the TTB is controversial. And I don't think a lot of people do it. The response from most people to watch it is basically just, those suck, don't do that. And that's why nobody does it and there's no videos on it.
Yeah, I mean, that reminds me of that was me and a 2-barrel carburetor on my Fairmont. Everybody's like, well, you're an idiot. Ditch the 2-barrel. I'm like, hey, you have to follow the whole series to understand why I'm doing the 2-barrel, right? And so, to your point, it's also like a searchability thing, right? Like, if nobody else has the cojones to actually put content out regarding it, like, eventually someone, and I always, like, what I always tell people when it comes time to write your title for your YouTube video, picture yourself bored out of your gills in a like medical facility waiting room, right? Like you're just like, oh, I don't know, this sounds crazy. And you type something in. That's what the TTB is. It's that I'm like, hey, you're bored, right? Like you're sitting in the waiting room and you're like, how to make the best flex TTB, right? Like someone's just like curious. And I think there's something to that. But I guess has that motivated you to think like how to take that to an extreme end, like stretch the traction beams, or do anything like that?
Yeah.
Wow.
So a couple things on that. One, it's interesting as we're talking about competition. Somebody in the chat earlier is talking about, well, if I do a 12 valve Cummins into a weird Ford, my competition's Weston Champlin, and I'm not winning that. People are going to pick his video every day. But when the competition is just somebody with their iPhone taking a 45-minute video of pulling apart the suspension, and those are really useful videos. There's nothing wrong with doing that. But when it's an actual analyzing the suspension itself, and some people I think do find them pretty useful, like you insinuated earlier, the twin I-beam is, people love twin I-beam. As soon as you make it four-wheel drive, though, people think it's terrible. And in some ways they're right, but if you ask any of the desert racers, it's the best suspension ever made. But if you ask the rock crawlers, it's horrible and you need to throw it away. So I do think part of it is that people do have an interest in it. One thing is that I think a lot of people drive those vehicles. They drive Broncos and Explorers and stuff, and they just get told, you need to rip that axle out and put a solid axle in it. Most people aren't going to do that. Some will, but not everybody. Whereas if I can go in and say like, oh, here's how you can actually make it good. Here's modify your springs and do this. And here's what you can do to your radius arms. It's a lot easier to just do it piece by piece than say, I'm going to rip a whole axle out of this vehicle. So I think some of them are just bored and looking up TTB, but I think some of them are genuinely, and a lot of my comments seem to be people saying, no, I'm actually going to do this. But yeah.
Yeah, well, I didn't mean it like the only way you're going to be interested in a twin traction beam setups if you're bored. I just was meaning like sometimes people like get those crazy ideas, right? When you're like, well, I've already looked through the typical things. I'm like, man, why haven't they called my name? Like, it's like, oh, what if? Like, so it's a crazy idea, right? And I don't know. It's
so
just
I seem to find that search is not where my views come from.
Okay.
So I actually think more what it is that it's people browsing on their homepage and they see that I've obviously put a lot of work into the suspension that they've completely written off, and that's where they have that bit of intrigue where they're like, why is he doing that? So it shows up on their homepage, and that's when they click on it. But another 12 valves or another Cummins swap, I think, honestly, it seems like it's oversaturated. I think people see that, and most don't click on it at this point. But
I might be inclined to disagree with you a little bit on the not clicking, because I mean, we're in 2022, and for the last probably 4 or 5 years, very solidly, the LS swap has been overcoming and overwhelming the internet and YouTube per se over everything. So when you go and you say that you're going to, I just said you go. When you go and say you're going to take a Cummins and prop it into something that is just totally unrelated or it's out there, I think it's clickable because every once in a while I will get something that pops up that maybe it's not Cummins related at all, but just something that sounds ridiculous. If it sounds ridiculous in the title, like I am a ridiculously titled clicking pervert, I guess you could say. I click on everything that looks ridiculous. So that's how you stumble upon some really good builds and some really good channels based on their titling and their thumbnails. If their thumbnails is going to catch your eye, then you look at the title. What is this title telling me? It's telling me that some guy in Idaho took a Ford Explorer from the 90s and said, I think a 12 valve Cummins would go good in this thing. You know, I think that there's something to be capitalized there. And at the end of the day, don't ever take for granted that what you're doing isn't something that someone's going to search or click. Yeah, they may not search 12 valve Cummins in an Explorer, but they're going to search 12 valve Cummins or Cummins Swap or something like that. And as long as that's what they're searching, your video should pop up every time, regardless of whether Weston Champlin's got, you know, 1 million views on every single video he ever put a Cummins in anything. So don't ever discount the fact that you're doing a project that nobody wants to see. You just got to get it in front of those people so they can see it, right? And I think it's advice that I give to you, but it's also advice I got to give to myself because, you know, we're all doing the same thing. You look at all these names in that chat right now, and pretty much, I would say probably 80% of them are all other YouTube channels, and they're all trying to do the same thing that we are. And one of the biggest reasons why Grant and I decided that we were going to continue on with the Car Guy and Six Fan Show long after we each reached 1,000 subscribers was to help other, you know, channels get there, and to not necessarily teach, but to show them what may or may not have worked for each other, to help us kind of move along. And again, if there's any one thing, any one piece of advice I can ever give a channel, is focus on the titling and the thumbnails is the two biggest things that you need to do, because people don't know that they want to watch your video until they see it. And how are they going to see it? It's with that thumbnail that's going to draw them in. And you know, and this goes not just for you. Again, I'm talking to myself because I'm still learning.
I think we all need a marketing person for our titles and thumbnails.
Yeah, you know, and I'm not sure, because sometimes you get one that just clicks and it looks great, and you feel like, oh man, I nailed it. And after a week, you've got 500 views. And then sometimes you do one that's just stupidly simple and doesn't look great at all. I did a video 3 weeks ago on this Lincoln that I bought, and the friggin' thing went to 18,000 views in a week. So I don't know what the secret is. If I did, I'd be selling it. So
the secret is that all the kids from the 90s are now old enough to care about those cars, I think. I think that's... Sorry. I just mean, like, because when I see that, I mean, I'm a little bit younger, I think, and when I see that you're working on that, it's a Lincoln Town Car, right? I see that and I'm like, oh, I know those. I owned one of those. I'm going to click on that video, but unfortunately, I'm also young enough that a lot of the older stuff, which is arguably cooler, I don't know what a lot of it is some of the time.
Well, it's funny you bring that up, Jeremy, and I'm going to go a little off topic here for a second. I'll try to rope it back in, but my wife and I were shopping last night, and we were at a shoes place, and they had like Doc Martens out, and like so I made comments like, "Oh, sweet, so your 1999 to 2001 styles," and then we went to a different store, and there was something else. I was like, "Okay, this," and then I'm thinking like, "Wait a second, if I did have kids, they would be entering high school." So like the fashion cycle, like I used to always think it was a 25-year cycle, and that's probably still pretty accurate, I guess. But I'm like, yeah, you're just trying to, it's like when Toy Story came back, it was like all the parents got to a certain age, like we need to remake Toy Story. We need to do 3 and 4, right?
Yep.
Because so I think you're spot on with that. But I want to go back to I'm going to beat this dead horse a little bit more, but the twin traction beam, if Jeff Ford was in here, he'd be loving this conversation, because I know
I'll talk about that all night. I don't mind.
Yeah. Well, at the end of the day, like the worst part about the twin I-beam or twin traction beam was alignment, right? Like you're always wearing out the, let's see, it usually wanted to sag. So you're always wearing out the inside of your tires. But if you think about it in your application,
Outside,
as a trail rig, does it really matter based on the amount of miles you're putting on anyway, right? Like, and you're articulating all over the place, doing things. So one, I think that's a moot point. But two, the second part about it is like when you're building a trail rig, it's really more about like the axle shaft spline count. Well, I mean, I want to when you're boiling down to the basics. So with the Dana 50 on something that's not okay, the Explorer's not heavy, but the 12 valve's heavy. I guess I'm just kind of thinking like it's really more about components at the axle shaft level. Like it's got to be a pretty dependable combination. So maybe speak a little towards the durability of a Dana 50 on a Explorer.
So a Dana 50 TTB, it's funny you pointed that because Dana 60 outers are the same. So the outers are actually very, very strong. Like I have one picture. I wish I had all this stuff on hand, but you can see the hub on the Dana 50 TTB. It's this big, and the one that came on the stock Explorer looks like a pencil thin compared to it. What you were saying about the alignment issues and stuff, that's one thing that I'm hoping to make people a little more aware of. The problem with the beams is when you lift the vehicle, the ends of the beams do this. And so you have now your tires are facing like this. And the problem is you can fix that. And it does the same thing to your steering because your steering follows a similar trajectory of the beams. And so there are ways to fix it. Like they call it a cut and turn would be the ultimate way to fix it. I don't think a cut and turn is any harder than half the stuff that you would have to do a solid axle swap, and that would fix your camber. And it's the same with the steering. If you're going to do a solid axle swap, you need to figure out steering for the new axle, and you can do a similar amount of modifications to your TTB steering, and it can actually be fixed. So that's one thing I would really love to bring more awareness to, is that there are ways to fix it. It's just that the information isn't very available. But
so, well, let's stick on the steering concept there for a second.
Okay.
I know because again, my high school vehicle was a 95 Ford F-150. So I started to, back in the car blogging days, figure out what are the extreme ends you can take these things to. So that's when I find out it's the most popular pre-runner suspension. So that in turn, plus 15 years, 20 years later, I'm following Wings World on YouTube, and that was probably the first time I heard about swing set steering. And so who are some of the so kind of two-part question. I'm sure you're aware of who Wings World is, but who are some of the big YouTubers you follow to help get some of your information? And then what is your ideal steering setup?
Yeah, I think Wings World is great, especially as far as like desert racing stuff goes. There's really only a few channels I feel like that do it, and Wings World I think is actually really good. I wish they'd upload more.
Yeah.
My ideal steering setup, so I think like the swing set steering, that's when you're getting to the point where that's full-blown race truck stuff. So while that would be amazing, that's not really what this build would be about. So what I did with my steering is I took a whole bunch of GM 1-ton tie rod ends and stuff like that, and I just modified mine. I took it and did a tie rod flip, which again is something you might have to do if you want high steer on a solid axle anyway. So I did a tie rod flip and put a bunch of GM 1-ton stuff on it, and it's basically stock like, so I can go buy tie rods at any auto parts store, but it's stock stuff from bigger trucks mostly, so that hopefully it all survives.
So Grant tends to keep going back to these I-beams, these things that Ford called a great suspension or a great invention, whatever it is.
Ford guys are going to talk about TTB.
I'm not a Ford guy. I've owned one Ford pickup in my life. It was a 90, but it was 4-wheel drive. So a little bit of a different setup there. The idea behind, suspension is purpose driven, I believe, right? So if you're looking to do rock crawling, then you're going to have a purpose driven suspension. If you're going to do pre-running, it's going to be a different setup. If you're going to do mall crawling and you just want it to sit 6 inches higher, it's going to be a completely different setup. Where does the design come into play to say, I want to mall crawl my 96 Ford F-150 King Cab. Like,
sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
Okay. In my opinion, a lot of the difference between rock crawling suspension and, say, desert racing suspension, the thing that prevents you from doing both really well boils down to spring rate and damping. So with desert racing, of course, you want the high damping, high spring rate because you got to take those huge hits. And with rock crawling, you want it to basically be on pool noodles. It's got to flex out everywhere without moving your body. But I do think a lot of people overestimate what they might do with their quote unquote rock crawler. I mean, a lot of people think they need a huge amount of travel and everything to do any trails in their rock crawlers. And I don't know. I don't have that much experience actually doing rock crawling, so maybe I'm just talking out my butt. But I think a lot of people could get away with suspension that does work well on the street and can go down a gravel road, and you don't have to drive 5 miles an hour because it's rattling you to bits, and can also do a little bit of red rock stuff. That's what I'm hoping the TTB will be for me, is jack of all trades, not quite as good at rock crawling, but a lot better in other areas.
Hopefully. So at the end of the day, what you're saying is that you're not building this truck just to look cool, or to daily drive. Like, this is you're building a purpose-driven vehicle. Am I correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I would almost say that what I'm going to use it for 90% of the time is closer to overlanding than it is to anything else, because it's going to be a camping rig, and I do want to be able to do other stuff with it, but I'm not going to be spending every single day driving down to Moab. So
let's keep it there. Let's keep the conversation there. If we'll sort of start to transition the conversation here on the CARRGUY SixFan Show. We like to talk about future content, but what's the next stage, or what's that? You talk about overlanding. What's the next kind of milestone for the Explorer?
So the way it currently sits, because I live in Idaho, I'm calling it street legal. But if I lived in any other state, they'd probably throw me in jail, because it's got no front bumper, it's got no hood, and it's got no front drive shaft either right now. That's something I need to build. So nothing's ever finished, but this one's kind of far away from finished. And if I can get it to the point where I could drive this vehicle 6 hours down to Moab and go for a rock crawling and mountain biking trip, that would be the ultimate. Okay, that's the next step. So now it's got a license plate on it, but that would be the next step.
So seeing how we're transitioning, I really would be remiss if we didn't talk EVs just for a second, because we tend to go down that road a little bit every episode over the last 5 or 6 episodes.
If you do, maybe now's when I go to the bathroom then.
Might be a good idea.
Hey, I got a good question for you about that, actually, Grant, on EVs, because it's something I heard you say on a previous episode. So maybe not, but I heard you mention on a previous episode, and maybe you've talked about it more and I just missed them, but I think one thing that's interesting with the EV conversation people don't talk about enough is alternate fuels. Because the idea with an EV is zero emission, right? Well, biodiesel does that. I heard you mention that. So does methanol. Who doesn't like methanol? So, anyways, I think that could be an interesting topic. But
and I think it is. Every episode we talk about it, we always say, we could spend a whole episode talking about, not just EVs, but the whole concept of alternate fuels, right? So, you mentioned, biodiesel and ethanol, and we're like, let's go even further, hydrogen and different stuff like that. My big thing is if you didn't have the diesel engine in this Explorer that you have right now, what would be your second choice of an engine swap to do what you're doing? Again, I'm not trying to steer this into an EV conversation. We're just talking about alternate different modes of transportation, different ways of moving your vehicles along.
So there may be EVs in the future on my channel, but it's not going to be the Explorer. But so I'm not opposed to thinking about that. But so you're saying if I had to have a zero emission vehicle, where would I go with it? Or are you saying
right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Or I would say the way I'd phrase it is where you started with it, Jeremy. It's not about EVs. It's about alternative. You said alternative fuels. I would say alternative energy. So if you had to do it all over again with the Explorer, what's the next alternative energy solution you would go after?
Well, on the Explorer, I'd probably just put biodiesel in it. But other alternatives, I think right now, I mean, I know we have all these 2035 goals and all this stuff, but I think right now it doesn't have to be zero. And I think there's things that we could do with diesel still that aren't going all the way there. Like, I would actually love to explore water methanol injection on my channel, because the thing with diesels is that you're not getting as much CO and noxious gas emissions. They actually do way better there. But the problem with diesel is that you get particulate. So if you can find a way to clean up the particulate, which is all this terrible emission stuff that ruins engines does, some ways to do that could be something like water methanol injection or something. So I think that would be a fun thing to explore, even on the current rig. But
Well, again, there's different people out there who are talking about different hybrid technologies too that will work better for lowering emissions. I mean, today it just seems like they want us to go from what we are to zero, like overnight almost. I mean, 2035, guys, is not that far. It's 13 years away. You know, they want us to kind of switch from night to day. Is there an alternative method of hybrid technology? Right now, it's gas electric. Seems to be the big one. You know, in your Toyota Priuses, you know, everything is kind of going that hybrid technology. But is there a diesel electric that may be better? Is there a hydrogen electric? Is there a something out there? Is our technology today where it should be for us to be exploring more options? They just want us to cut it off at the head. But is there something else out there that we should be looking at that says, okay, rather than give us 13 years to reinvent the wheel, why not reduce it by 50% in 13 years? And then give us another, whatever, in the 13 years to go a little bit further.
Yeah. One easy way to do that I think all gearheads could agree with is, even if in 13 years they say, okay, now everybody needs to run E50 or something, that would do it right there without changing anything else about the technology. And again, that's just getting us closer to race car fuel. So I really like the idea of ethanol and methanol. I mean, it makes it way more expensive, but I don't mind paying a little bit more if it means that we get to run our gas engines for longer, and if it means that we can put a lot more boost in the engine anyway. So,
well, I was gonna go back to the diesel conversation, because and kind of to Jason's point, it's like the word hybrid so powerful, but why is it always got to be and electric, right? So propane injection was all the craze for diesel there a decade ago, but if you found a way to, and we tried doing propane as an alternative fuel in the 80s, it wasn't necessarily a horrible solution. They just didn't know how to make power back then, right? So can you atomize your fuel better and have less particulates because it burns cleaner, because you're slowly also hybridly, is that a word?
Yeah.
Injecting propane in with your diesel, you know, like, are there just other solutions like that?
No, I would agree. People talk about propane as if it's like nitrous for diesels. Like, it actually burns awesome in diesels. So I'd be down for that. You're talking about these propane powered cars. I have a 5.3, or at least I think it's a 5.3 sitting in my garage right now that has propane injection stuck to it because I pulled it out of a random car. I don't know if I'm ever going to do anything with that propane injection, but it's kind of a cool little engine to have sitting there. You did mention hydrogen. I do think hydrogen is one of the few that I personally don't see. I think it's Toyota's doing a lot of stuff with it right now, but until we come up with a better way to separate hydrogen, it's so energy intensive. I don't see that. But natural gas and propane and everything, like, we can go a long ways, and water methanol and ethanol and all those things, we could go a long ways towards cleaning it up. But
has anybody ever nailed down the dilithium crystal from the Star Trek era? Like, is this something that is a thing that we can, make happen? I mean, it seems as though it works in a spaceship. Why can't it work in a car?
I'm not sure about the dilithium crystal. You might have to explain that one.
No, it's a Star Trek
nerd.
It's a Star Trek thing. Nerd, yeah, exactly. I guess we'll end that conversation. Like I said, it's something that we can certainly talk about for a long time, because every time we have a different guest, they always have a kind of a different spin on the alternative energy or hybrid technology or EV or whatever it happens to be. And I always like to find out what, where people's minds are when it comes to looking at these alternative energy sources, because for as long as people will be on this earth, they'll need transportation. And if they're going to ban fossil fuels or whatever it's going to be, then it's got to be a great topic of conversation. Hot rodders are still going to want a hot rod down the road. So we talked a little bit about some of the future things that are coming up on Build Something. What is the next video going to do for the people who want to watch what you're doing? What's coming up in the next video?
Yeah, so the next one is, you called Jason nerd, but you might call me a nerd after this one. So it's going to be a little bit of a tangent on the Explorer. I bought the one engine that doesn't have a computer or anything for it, and now I might be building a computer for it. I actually have it sitting right next to me on the desk. I have a dashboard out of a parts car Explorer, and I'm trying to build my own dashboard without having to buy Holley anything. Or I like saving money, and I think some of that crap's way too expensive. So what I'm trying to do right now is see, can I make my own little data logging system for this car that works without having to spend $1,000 on a Holley. And yeah, so I'm hoping my audience likes that. That's quite a big departure from the rest of the build, but we'll see.
Well, and just where the world's gone with microcomputers, like your Raspberry Pis and all the things, like people find some very creative things to just be a one-trick pony or whatever. So that's actually, I think there's some, I think that should actually probably perform well on YouTube. I'm not going to spend much time talking about upcoming content on my channel because it's pretty predictable. It's more interior stuff. So Jason, what's coming up on Old Car Guy?
Well, surprise, surprise, we're still working on the Lincoln. We finished up another video today, which ended with the vehicle actually running. So that's the spoiler alert. But that video, hopefully, if I can finish getting that edited tomorrow afternoon, that will go up sometime. And I think I'm going to premiere it tomorrow evening. So stay tuned for that. It's going to be a little bit of a lengthy one. I think right now I'm at about 20 to 25 minutes. So if you've got a half an hour to spend next or tomorrow night, make sure you look for that premiere on the Lincoln. Not all is lost. We do have a few issues to deal with on it still, but you got to remember, I bought this car cheap, and the only thing I knew about it at the time was that the motor didn't run. I didn't know about anything else. So today, yes, we got it running, but there are other things. So that video will come out, like I said, premiering tomorrow. Guys, usually this is the point in the show where we would tell you that, the Car Guy Six Fan Show is a collaborative effort, and each week we alternate back and forth. Well, for the next 3 weeks, so including tonight, it's going to be hosted on my channel because next week Grant will be here, believe it or not, all the way from Kansas. He's coming to Canada. He's going to be here in my shop. Only we're doing it on Friday night, not Thursday night. So don't expect to see the Car Guy Six Fan Show on Thursday. It will be live on Friday. The plan is...
Did we decide, are we going to move it up an hour? Because I know we're promising the fans probably at least a 2-hour show, but...
Yeah, so we have not decided that, but it's quite possible that we may start an hour sooner because, well, we're just going to lay it back, and it's just going to be the couple of guys, having some conversation. We're going to be including you guys in the chat, and we appreciate everything that you guys do for us. So, the opportunity for Grant to be here means next year I got to be there. So at some point we'll make sure that we make that happen. So make sure you're tuned into the Car Guy Six Fan Show, powered by the Get Out and Drive podcast next week. Also on Sunday this week, October the 2nd, is National Get Out and Drive Day. I just want to plug that one more time. If you guys don't know what that is, head over to getoutanddrive.com. You can register. If you do, we're going to send you one of these stickers so that you can put it on your car, your toolbox, your cabinet, whatever you got. Just make sure you have the opportunity to grab a friend, grab your wife, your spouse, whatever, your kids, and head out and make sure you have the opportunity to get out and drive. It's a great opportunity. If you wanted to donate to the RPM Foundation, it supports our initiative of #WhatDrivesYouth. We want to get the next generation of car people into the trades so that they can pass on the information that we know, and so that future generations can continue learning about cars and the body work and mechanics and all that sort of thing, even right down to the whole engineering side of things. So we hope that you guys have that opportunity. Grant, I'm going to throw it over to you to thank everybody and close out the show.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks once again, everybody in the chat, but most importantly, thank you, Jeremy, for coming on, sharing a little insight to your channel and what you got going on over there. And honestly, it's a pleasant surprise for me. I guess I saw a few of the images of your radius arms. I just assumed you had a solid axle in there. So it was actually, I was way more, this was actually awesome for me to get to know that. And
Cool.
yeah, yeah, it was the appropriate thing to do. But Jeremy, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for having me. I had a great time, and I think you guys have an awesome show. So appreciate you being on. Thank you.
Your check, we'll send your check in the mail as soon as possible for the kind words. So with that, again, it is on Jason's channel next week, Friday, potentially, let's call it 6 p.m. Central. Just keep your eyes peeled to our Instagram channel or pages and whatnot. But otherwise, to all my Six fans out there, thanks for watching.